Hey, friend, welcome to another episode of Start That Business. Today's episode is super special and super dear to my heart. And the reason is I am interviewing a guest who is also my husband. Yes, we've been married for 19 years. We celebrated our 19th year anniversary yesterday. And I thought that it would be special to have him on the podcast because both of us are also co founders of my first service based business, which is the e commerce logistics business. And I thought to myself, maybe there are people here who want to start a business or who have already started a business with their spouse. They can learn a thing or two from us, being married for 19 years and running a business together. So, lace those shoes, pop in those earbuds. This is going to be extra special. This is the first time I have him on the podcast. So I am so excited to have this conversation with my husband as we talk about building business and bond, lessons from 19 years of marriage, and co-founding a service-based business together. Are you ready to streamline your focus and get clarity to start your online service-based business? Are you tired of struggling with lack of clarity, self-doubt, and the fear of being a public failure? Do you wish you had a clear plan you could follow to make your calling a reality? Hey friend, you don't have to stay stuck any longer. With a renewed mindset and a clear plan, you can start a business that fulfills your calling and makes a profit. I'm your host, Ukomadu, a Christian business coach, Jesus follower, and a 7-figure service-based entrepreneur. In this podcast, I'll teach you how to streamline your focus, get clarity on your business idea, create your business launch plan, set up your business essentials, and launch your sustainable and profitable business from scratch. You will get tons of encouragement, godly wisdom, and accountability to grow in your faith and new business journey. It's time to partner with God and take your first step to start that business. You know the one I'm talking about? Yes, that one you've been putting off for a long time. I am super excited to welcome Osi Ukomadu on today's episode. Osi or Osinachi is the CEO and co-founder of Hiroshi, a social e-commerce company empowering African social sellers to source globally and sell locally. With over a decade of experience in supply chain analytics and consulting, he's worked with industry leaders like ExxonMobil, T-Mobile, and Apple. His expertise includes strategic planning, technical architecture, and leadership. OC happens to be my husband of 19 years. He's a devoted husband, a proud father of 3 kids. He's also a soccer enthusiast who values family and community. OC, welcome to Start That Business podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Such an honor to be here. I'm excited.
I'm so excited. Do you know how long we've tried to schedule this podcast guest interview? I'm excited to have OC, my husband here, and also my co-founder. I call him Mr. CEO. So, Mr. CEO, welcome to my podcast.
Thank you for
it's
having me.
it's so this episode is so special to me because this week is the week of our anniversary. So let me just give you guys a sneak peek. So Osi and I, we have our what the couples call it. They call it their that's that one thing that they always fight about. So for both of us is the year we got married. So I am Nigerian, and in Nigeria, we go through multiple weddings. So you have the traditional wedding, you have the white wedding. So we did our traditional wedding in 2004, and our white wedding was in 2005. So that is our own irreconcilable difference. So OC says we got married in 2004. I say we got married in 2005. And we keep going back and forth. So, based on 2005, we're celebrating 19 years of marriage this week. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about how we've been able to build business and bond, being a married couple and also co founding a service based business together. So, OC, do you think couples should even think about starting a service-based business together? Let's even start from there.
That's a very, very loaded question. So now many things come with starting a business with your significant other because like people say, mixing business with family or mixing business with pleasure because you are dealing with different aspects. So to answer the question directly, it is a worthwhile thing to do if you have a strong foundation. But the foundation has to be there to enable that enterprise to thrive. Other than that, you will struggle. And I will tell my own or our own story rather through the journey. It wasn't there at the beginning. We had to figure it out. It was like we were trying to run a company and figure out our relationship at the same time in building that solid foundation. So that's to say that you don't necessarily have to have the strong, solid foundation to start, but you have to keep in mind that that is necessary for you to be able to build a business on top of that relationship because one is going to pull the other and it's going to be very challenging. Is it worthwhile? Yes, it is going to test you in every dimension, but you have to be completely committed to both directions, the relationship and the business, to be able to make it work. But it's worth it. Absolutely.
Wow. So you heard him. He said it's worth it. It's worth it. There's something you said about having the solid foundation, or at least being committed to build that foundation as you build the business. Because, like you said, we didn't have that when we started off, but having that commitment to build that foundation was really critical. So it's possible. It's definitely possible.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is very, very possible. And, of course, we're not the first ones to do it. Many people have done it in the past. I mean, Bill Gates and wife, and a whole host of other people who have done business as couple with a small business or big enterprise or startup. A lot of couples have done it. But the more important thing is just being able to recognize that, both the relationship time, both of you together stands strong and priority above everything else. And then everything else is built on top of that. Just like if you're building a house, you cannot build the next level until the foundation is solid. And for us, we were naive. We didn't know much about much. We kind of figured it out, made a lot of mistakes along the way. And I'm guessing we're going to talk about some of those mistakes as we go down the path. Yeah, it's been a journey.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you spoke about the foundation being one of the critical things. What other things do you think anyone listening should consider as maybe a first step when they are deciding to start a service-based business together? So you spoke about foundation. What else do they need to consider at that beginning stage, even before they embark on the journey?
For us, and this also could be also part of the foundational piece for us. The financial component of things was critical
Yes.
because somebody had to hold it down while the other person, goes to enter to risk it all essentially. So you can't have both parties all in it without having some source of income that steadies the family or steadies the relationship together to be able to make it work. So in our own case, I was consulting while you were starting and running the business, then eventually kind of tapered off and then got involved in the business and then were able to work together across time. But that piece of having that structure financially to be able to support each other through the course. I can't imagine what it would have been like if we both jumped in at the same time, knee deep, without having that foundational basis of the financials to be able to navigate through the tough times. So that is a critical component to think about. how are you going to finance your life, your lifestyle, your family, and other things while you are both starting this thing together? It's either you have nest egg saved, something that you can be able to tap into, and you know how long that's going to carry you, or you have someone that is consulting and bringing in income, or working full time and bringing in income to help drive the family finances while the business is being built and both of you are working at it together.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that, because that is a critical piece that can bring in a lot of chaos, a lot of back and forth when that is not settled. So, like you said, you were consulting while I was doing the business full time, and that provided some kind of foundation in terms of the financials, to where we were not worrying much about, oh, how are we going to pay the bills, or how are we going to eat or drink. That agreement between both of us helped us balance things to where I could focus on building the service-based business while you could be doing other things. So, will you say that running the business together has strengthened our marriage, or do you think otherwise? And if you say yes, how has it strengthened our marriage?
Definitely. So the strengthening is the aftermath of the experience. So it definitely has challenged our relationship. And just like going to the gym, right? You don't build muscles by just eating and sitting on the couch every day. You go to the gym, you pick up the weight, you lift it up, and it's in that stressing of the body that you break down the muscles, and then you rest and eat well and get enough fluid, and then the body rebuilds back the muscle, and then you grow muscle. Essentially, it's the same thing in being in that struggle together as a couple, dealing with business challenges, dealing with ourselves, challenging one another,
Yes.
the rough patches, and having our moments where we either disagree about a direction or disagree about how much we're going to invest in a certain path, and having that back and forth, we got the opportunity to learn more about each other, what each person values more than the other.
Yes.
I got to learn that you value more stability. You value the structure, having a structure
Structure.
around. Whereas for me, I fly by the seat of my pants. I am spontaneous. I get an idea, I want to run off and do stuff, but you like, okay, let's sit down and think about this. Let's put some numbers together and make it. I'm like, okay, why are you trying to constrain my thoughts? Why are you trying to constrain my dream? Because I want to just go off and do stuff, right? So
Y'all pray for me. Y'all pray for me.
being in that place where I have to learn to factor your own needs into the equation and not just run off and go do things, and having those moments of struggle, because it took me a while to see to, because for me personally, I'm the kind of person that I get an idea, I just want to go, 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 right? And if anything is standing in the way, I see that thing as a block. I see it as an enemy. I want to fight that thing that is blocking me, and learning that I have need, you have need, and the struggle is to align those needs. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just the opportunity to align those needs. And it's in those struggles that we built a stronger bond that has enabled us to build the business on top of that. So essentially, is an aftermath of the struggles that we've had across the years that has enabled us to build the business on top of the relationship.
I like the analogy you used about the gym. Although some of us wish we could build those muscles without going to the gym.
Life
But
doesn't work that way.
it's spot on, because when you lift those weights, when you put resistance, that's when you build strength in the muscles. And it's been the same thing. The challenges of business, balancing the relationship, all those things that come into it has helped us build strength, to where now we can have certain conversations and laugh about it.
Yep.
But it wasn't so funny back then when it was happening. So, speaking about challenges strengthening us, what would you say was one mistake we've made in business that you think other couples can learn from and avoid?
Mhm. The one mistake that we have made, well, I'll start with me personally, is that I haven't done a very good job in carving out family finances and putting a strong barrier, right? And say, okay, this is a no-go area. Do not touch this area, kind of thing. So, as I mentioned earlier on, I'm driven by passion. I'm driven by vision. I'm driven by idea. I tend to be idealistic. So even though we have put some financial structures in place, but when these ideas begin to flow, I push, I push, I push, and oftentimes I will break the barrier that we have set, and then would eventually end up in that situation where we jeopardize family finances, and then would eventually have to now spend time and effort to rebuild it back again. So as a result of that, we kept having that flow back and forth over a period of time. So what I would say to a couple in this scenario is, like, you have to set clear boundaries of how much are you going to spend per either month or quarter or year from either the savings or family earnings, to say, okay, this is how much we want to invest in the business or how much we want to grow. Not growth at all costs, which is what my mind was set initially, which is this: do everything we can do, grow, 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 at the detriment of family finances. Being able to set that strong barrier, being able to hold each other accountable to it. That was some of the mistakes that I made earlier on. And obviously, we're at a better place now, and we were able to learn through those experiences and fix it along the way. But initially, we're just being driven by passion and excitement of what could be. And as an entrepreneur, and that is the cost of an entrepreneur. You, as an entrepreneur, you're guided by your passion, excitement, vision, dream. You want to do things, and you need to have that yin and yang. You need to have that push and pull to help you balance. And that's what I didn't have at the beginning. And that's how I pulled us to the extreme. But over a period of time, with the yin and yang balancing together, bringing everything to the middle, we're beginning to find a middle ground. It's not perfect yet, but we're finding our way to the middle.
Yeah, I like what you said about set boundaries. And boundaries is one of the things I talk about a lot on the podcast here. I've had episodes where I've spoken about boundaries because when you're starting a business, you're so passionate about what you want to do, but you also have a family that you're accountable to, and having those clear boundaries where you are not, like you said, jeopardizing your family or putting them in harm's way to where you're not able to provide the basics anymore because you've been so driven by your passion and you didn't put the necessary boundaries. So I like that you mentioned that, because realizing or coming to terms that, yeah, we need to put boundaries. We can't just take all our savings and put it in the business, or empty out our children's college fund and put it in the business, and take retirement fund and put it in the business. There has to be boundaries, because at the end of the day, you have these two separate entities, your family and the business, and you shouldn't put one on the line at the detriment of the other one. So while we're still talking about boundaries, what other boundaries have we set to ensure that we nurture our marriage while we are managing the responsibilities of running the business? What are some other boundaries that we've set in place?
So the other boundaries, I wouldn't necessarily call them boundaries, but structures that we put in place. As in this case, boundary connotes setting a line and making it strong and not letting it bleed. Because if you think about it, as an entrepreneur, you don't have an on and off switch, especially if you're an entrepreneur with your spouse in the same business. It's not like you have, or you can be able to maintain this strong line that says, at this point, we stop talking about business, or at this point, we just only focus on family. Things kind of bleed through, especially when you are both passionate about what you're building and you're deeply invested in those things. But what we have done in our marriage is set certain structures in place that enables us to be able to spend time together with each other and connect at a deeper level, in connecting to learn about each other and to grow in that understanding of each other. So whether it is date nights or our morning, 3 times a week morning conversation where we just sit down and we talk about general life things. So being able to have those structures in place enables us to sort of get away from just focusing on the business, but just focusing on our own lives and what's happening within each of us independently and us as a couple, and then the broader family all together. So having those structures in place have enabled us to be able to build a stronger bond. Again, we didn't start this at the very beginning so that people are not thinking, oh, you guys figured out this great structure at the beginning.
Yeah.
At the beginning, it was everywhere. There were no structures, no boundaries. Everything just bled through everywhere. And for me, I was the chief architect of no boundaries. And they just live life and go fly by the seat of our pants. And as time wore on, and as I saw the detrimental effect of not having these structures in place, and then having to have these structures in place, believe me, I'm the one that's pushing for us to stick by these structures because I've seen the benefit of having these structures in place in terms of the number of times that we avoid having to get into a bad situation because we had certain conversations ahead of time. So those are the things that we put in place in terms of structure to enable us to have to meet our own needs internally apart from the business needs.
Yeah, I like that you said that we didn't have these things doing at the beginning, but as we went along doing life, doing business, doing marriage, everything together, we learned that we needed to put these structures in place. And it's something that has been a game changer for us, like having our date nights every once a month. We just go and we try to avoid talking about business when we go on our date night. Though sometimes it bleeds in, like he said, because you have two passionate people running a business. I also like the weekly check-ins. The weekly check-ins I feel has really been a game changer. So 3 times a week. So our weekly check-ins, we normally do it in the mornings. So 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we sit down, we talk to each other. What is going on emotionally with you? How are you doing? We talk about like deeply emotional things. We hear each other out. And when we're done, we pray together and just encourage each other. So that has really been a game changer for us, having us go through that. Because now what that has done is things don't have to build up anymore because you can get caught up in running the business that you forget that you are married and you have other responsibility. So what that check-in does, it helps us just pause and say, okay, how are you as a person beyond being an entrepreneur, a CEO, a COO, a co-founder, or any other title? It just helps us pause and slow down to process life and everything that is happening around us. So, can you share a major disagreement
Mhm.
we have had about the business and how we resolved it while maintaining respect and unity for each other? Because I know that might be on someone's mind. They're like, oh, I don't want to do business with my husband because it can get messy. So can you share a disagreement, one that comes to mind that was really profound?
Uh, We've had so many of them that it's hard picking out the most. I would say the one that sticks to mind was, I don't remember the year where you were opting out. You wanted to opt out because you just felt burnt out. You felt that uh, your views were not being taken into consideration. And I recall the trigger for it was once when we were called with some of our team members, our product team, and some conversation came up, and I sided with the product team uh, at your displeasure, and it didn't go down well with you. I didn't know it didn't up until afterwards where some things began to unravel. So what was the genesis of it? It was more about pricing, or how either pricing or how we collect payment, where we're having conversation whether at some point in the future we would do postpaid as opposed to prepaid for the business. And I tended to side with the product team because I was looking at the potential possibilities that that could open. Now, for you, that raised a whole lot of alarm bells in your head, because as a detail person running the operations, how are you going to pay for this? How are you going to pay for that? But for me, as the idealistic person, I'm thinking, wow, if we could do this, we could get this many customers who will ship this much volume and all of these things. And I was all sucked in on the possibilities of what could happen. So after the call, we came out of the call and your facial expression changed. You became a
Yeah.
bit, yeah, you became withdrawn, and I couldn't quite figure out why. And it wasn't up until later on I got to understand that it wasn't just that I sided with these guys. It felt more like, okay, you have been alone running this thing for a while, and here is these other guys that come in to build this thing with you, and they're taking these things off of your hands, making these decisions that you would not have made, and it's costing you some angst. Like, how can they just come and take this thing that I've been nursing all along and building this thing, building it to the way that I'm comfortable with, and moving along, and all of a sudden they have all come to just run roughshod over me. And not only that, here is my husband siding with them. So that was how it all came out. And we had a lot of back and forth conversation about this. And my position was that I wasn't siding them as much as I was siding the idea of what the business could become. But I didn't realize I was having an emotional conversation as opposed to a
Mm,
logical business conversation. In
right.
my mind, I was still having a logical business conversation, and I did not connect to the emotional side of things. It wasn't until we began to go through therapy and began to talk through some of these feelings and emotions that it became clear that, okay, it wasn't just that I chose this path. It was all of these other things of making you feel unseen, unheard, and insignificant in the grand scheme of things that I had not factored in. So in my mind, I was thinking of everyone as peers on the table. You bring your idea, you bring your idea, we bring your idea, we judge it on the merits, and it's just pure logical discussion. But I then realized that beyond that, there's an emotional component to it. So I had
Right.
to be the CEO and the husband. And the job for the two sides was not very clear. At that point, I wasn't matured enough or knowledgeable enough to know that I had to play those two roles simultaneously. So I played
Wow.
the role of a CEO and did not play the role of a husband. And then that came to bite me at the rear end. Now, looking back, I should have done things different, although I would have still gone in that direction that they went to, but I would have had conversation with you to understand how it made you feel, right? To have a more of a feeling conversation afterwards, to really dive in deeper to understand how that affected you. But me, I just saw it as a pure logical conversation, deal with it, move on. And that was the mindset that I had back then is it makes sense. It makes sense to me. It should make sense to you. Let's move on. But realizing that people process information differently, and especially if you're working with people with someone with a different kind of temperament, you have to understand their temperament and how they see things. It doesn't invalidate how they see things or how they approach things. It's just a different perspective. And I had to make the effort to understand from your perspective what that meant to you and to provide you that covering so that you don't feel alone and you don't feel that you are fighting all of these guys all by yourself and you don't have someone covering you and protecting you in that battle. So I had to unlearn and then relearn that.
Unlearn
that
and relearn.
yeah, I had to play both roles at the same time.
I love what you said about learning to play the role of CEO and husband. And I think that's one of the major dynamics of working with your spouse in business, learning to balance both roles because it's not just someone you don't know. This is someone that you're going to sleep in bed with. You're sleeping on the same bed
Mhm.
when you're done with your 9 to 5. So you're not, the person is not going to another house while you are going to another house. And like you said, those things bleed in my day at work bleeds into my day at the house. So I like that you mentioned being able to balance those two roles. It's almost like you're wearing multiple hats in a 24-hour period or during the 9 to 5 work period. So what are some things that have helped you balance that role? Because a conversation can easily go from a logical conversation to an emotional conversation just because you have your spouse in it. You also mentioned therapy. What role has therapy played, and how are you able to balance those two hats?
Very significant role in terms of therapy, being able to see things from a different point of view and to understand, first of all, myself, because that was the major breakthrough for me, being able to understand how I process information, being able to understand my history, my background, my family of origin, and how we dealt with challenges. Because for me, growing up, I grew up in a home where challenging conversations were about who was right, about winning, right? It wasn't about hearing the other person out. It's more
Mm,
about winning the conversation and being seen as the right on the right side and the other person as the enemy. So my approach was, okay, make logical sense, defend the logical sense that you make, and everything should be well with the world. When I got to understand myself and got to understand the faults in myself, and then in a series of conversations with the therapist, got to understand your background, your history, family of origin, and all of that stuff. I got to see my deficiency. I got to see your deficiency. I got to see the need you have and the need that I have. And then when we have these conversations, it's not about the facts any longer. It's about the need of
right.
the other person. What
It's
does
about the need of the other person.
Absolutely. What does she need in this conversation, in this conflict? What does she need? Does she need reassurance? Does she need to know that I'm there? Does she need a word of encouragement? What does she need? And it's not about, most times, it's not even about the issue or the situation. It's about something else that is a gap on the inside that needs to be filled. And when we went through those sessions, I there were two things playing out in my mind. It was the process of being dissected by the therapist and learning about myself. It was also watching her level of dexterity in the way she asked questions, paused to listen, and then asked deeper questions. So it was more like an education for me, like, wow, so someone can have hard conversations at this level of calmness, right, and dig deeper. So I began to use, though she was helping me learn about me, I was also picking up tools about how to have deeper conversations with someone in a non-judgmental way. So picking
Wow.
up on those skills and learning those things and then taking them back helped me to now, first of all, whenever we have conflict, in my mind, the first question is, what is her need right now? And
Mm,
how can I draw out that need to then be able to address that need, as opposed to addressing the facts of the situation? The facts of the situation was what I was used to. And usually I would deal with the fact of the situation, but the fact of the situation never got me the resolution I wanted. So I had to deal with the need of the situation, and in dealing with that was where I got to understand, okay, that's really the root cause of the whole thing. And once I can bring myself to handle the need of the situation, then the solution begins to unravel. Now, it doesn't mean that everything becomes okay. It just means that we can meet each other at an equal place and be able to have a more
right.
conversation.
Right, right. I like what you said about what does she need right now? What does he need right now? Because when you take it from the realm of logical conversation to a need conversation, you're addressing the person at the core of what they need to meet you halfway or to move from the point they are to where you want them to be. So it's it's definitely a balancing act. And like you mentioned, therapy has helped us. We have Christian therapists that we see on a regular basis to help us, because we're not just running a business, we also have a marriage intertwined in the business. So it can get really messy really quickly. So I like that you mentioned about focusing on needs and trying to get to the core of, it's it really the website that is the issue, or there's something else that happened before the website that is making her mad or making him mad. So it's very important to spend time to get deeper to the roots so that you can resolve issues and move forward as you continue to run the business. So what role will you say forgiveness has played in helping us navigate conflicts as both business partners and spouse? Because like you said, there's a laundry list of conflicts.
Forgiveness is for us, is one of the core principles of our belief, obviously as Christians. And for us as a couple, we set out at the very beginning to say that divorce was not an option, and no matter
And
what.
can you say that again for the people at the back?
Yeah, we agreed at the very beginning, even before we got married, that divorce was not an option, and no matter whatever happens, we'll find a way to walk through it. So we always knew from beginning that we wanted to make this work. Now, obviously, anybody can be able to set you can have utopian mindset of what the future is going to be. You can set all kinds of principles and everything. Like they say, everybody has a strategy until you get punched in the face. And then when life punches you in the face, then your strategy goes away and then you have to really deal with life. So we had all of these great ideas of what a marriage was going to be like, but we were tested. We were tested along the way, particularly the example I mentioned last time where she wanted to just walk away from the whole thing. And I was still consulting. She was running the business. I hadn't come in really 100% at that time. And then in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, she walks away. Everything we've invested in is going to just collapse like that. And then relationship, what happens to relationship and all of that. So in that testing period was where we really sat down, had lots of conversation, which didn't get us where we needed to, but at least it moved us forward to some degree. But we lacked the tools at that time to be able to get us to where we needed to get to. We then got help, as I mentioned earlier on, and in getting help, when we understood ourselves, was when we deeply understood how flawed we were. And
Yeah,
here's the thing about you understanding yourself. When you understand yourself and how flawed you are, you actually gain a deep sense of empathy for other people.
right,
You gain a sense of, wow, I am this messed up and someone still loves me. So that helps you to easily forgive someone else
right,
and be able to deal with situations better because you think, okay, I I have these proclivities that can be very annoying. I think logically in a way that doesn't take empathy or feelings into consideration, and still someone wants to and is enduring that across these years with me. And you really truly see yourself and see all your flaws. So when you realize, just like someone when coming to Jesus moment, when you realize that you have been this horrible of a person and yet Christ still loved you, and then you break down in this sense of just overwhelming emotion that wow, you have been loved in spite of all your foolishness, and then you come to this place of I can be loved, and you accept Christ. Then you have this mindset that if I can be this messed up and yet beloved, then how can I not forgive someone else? And that is the responsibility that we have. That to whom much, to whom no, him that has been forgiven, you ought to forgive other people. Essentially, so if you have received forgiveness, it is a responsibility to now hand off that forgiveness to other people. So that for me was the core thing in knowing myself and realizing my fault and realizing my weaknesses, my frailties, and being loved through all of that gave me the ability to say, okay, forgiveness is a mantra in our marriage.
Yeah, forgiveness is a mantra in our marriage. And like you said, if you've been forgiven much, you are expected to forgive much.
Yep.
So I like that you brought that piece. What role will you say faith has played in our relationship? Or can you share a time, a specific time where prayer or scripture provided clarity for like a major decision we faced together? How has faith played a role in running this business and couple thingy?
It's, I mean, it's a core of everything that we do, and is the anchor that holds it all together. Like in the current challenges that we're facing, been meditating on Joshua 1, and first of all, before we got into the current challenges we're facing, I read through back again Exodus, just read it through end to end, just looking at the life of Moses and seeing his journey and the travails that they went through to even get to Moab, where they were before he passed away. And then now meditating on Joshua and,
Preach, OC, preach.
and looking at his life and transitioning from Moses and taking up the responsibility of leading the people. So as a leader, I'm constantly looking at the scripture to see how other men led, right?
Yes,
Because,
yes.
we as Christians, our we take cue from the scriptures to help us navigate through life. Every of great leader in the scripture, every one of them went through challenges. Everyone. None of them went through an easy life. So I don't buy into that mindset that as Christians we're going to have it easy. I don't see that in the scripture. Matter of fact, it's very, very clear that we're going to have challenges. So when I look at someone like Joshua in Joshua 1, where he had to take on the responsibility of carrying the people of Israel forward after Moses had gone, and he had to figure out how does he build alignment with all the different tribes of Israel, who does he tap on to build with him and to carry on with him, and to find the anchor to build to build his army to pursue and take over the land that had been promised to them. So being able to see the journey, the hero's journey of Joshua, and looking at my life where I am now and see the challenges that I'm facing, the struggles that we're facing, and being able to navigate that, and seeing how Joshua transitioned from being that kid that was under Moses to now taking up the reins of being a leader for this vast army of people and to lead them into a territory they've never been to before, and having to build that up. So when I look at those texts in the scripture, it helps me see myself. And one of the things that have stood out in that Joshua 1 1 through the end is be strong and courageous. And what keeps going off in my head is that God would not tell you to be strong and courageous if there was nothing that would cause you to doubt your strength and your courage. So when God is saying to me, be strong and courageous, that's to me to say that, yes, the things that will cause you fear would come, the things that will test your courage would come, but be strong and very courageous throughout the challenging times. And that's what we are here for. And that's what faith is to me, being able to glean into the life of these patriarchs, being able to glean into the life of Christ and see all the challenges that they went through, how they stood through and made it through. Because God is looking for warriors. God is not looking for people who are weak. God is looking for warriors who will do kingdom work. And if you present yourself to be a warrior who has gone through challenges and borne the stripes, God finds your hand strong to battle and to win victories for the kingdom. And that's really what the scriptures and what faith means to me, being able to see men who have done it before and leveraging from their success and their challenges to do the same.
I love the story of Joshua that you just talked about. So, for anyone who is looking to start a service based business with your spouse, I will tell you what God told Joshua: be strong and very
Very,
courageous.
very courageous. Yep.
Because
That's what you need.
you're going to need it. You're definitely going to need it. So, what communication tools or practices will you say have helped us stay aligned, especially during stressful times in the business? I know we spoke about some of the structures and boundaries we put in place, but in terms of communication tools, which one stands out to you or practices have helped us, especially during stressful times?
I mean, is having those walk talks that we have. They are not structured, they're not planned, they're sort of like impromptu, where we just walk and talk and we get to, like this conversation we're having right now, have such conversations where we encourage each other. It takes me back to the days of our early days where when we had our first kid and we had some struggles, and we would take walks and dream and talk about juicy
Yes.
things and where life is going to take us, and we would have all these grand ideas. Even in the midst of the challenging times, we will be dreaming about a future that is bright and great and everything. That for me, it feeds into the core of my person, because I tell people that I'm like the shark, the proverbial shark that needs to constantly be swimming, else it dies. Like, I feel like if I'm not dreaming, I die inside of me. And when I'm having that moment of walking and talking with you, and we can continue to dream in spite of the overwhelming, challenging moments that we're in, and we can have those times where we walk and talk and dream, it brings and breathes life into me and gives me hope. So one of my key prayers to God is, God, don't ever take my hope away. That is one thing that I live by, because when I am hopeful, I can wake up in the middle of the battle and I see great future, because I see something I can anchor onto for a great future that's going to come. So those moments of just walking and talking spontaneously, those are key moments for me.
Wow. Another communication tool I remember that has really been a game changer for us is a book called Nonviolent Communication. Nonviolent Communication. Because whether you like it or not, if you have not learned how to communicate, the chances are you're communicating violently.
Yep.
Meaning your communication lacks empathy, your communication is not rooted in observing what the other person is doing and how it's affecting you. You're more judging them, making accusations and saying things that make them withdraw from you instead of move toward you to communicate. So, yeah, nonviolent communication. I'm going to put a link to that book in the podcast description. That's one book that really helped us in terms of our communication and our practices, so that we started learning how to speak in certain ways when we have conversations, what to say, what not to say, what will be a trigger, and practice things that engender empathy and connection. So that book really, really helped us in our communication.
Oh, and by the way, I was the one that discovered and shared it with her. I just wanted to point that out.
Really? You had to say that?
Oh,
Well,
well, you can take credit for the second book.
we'll give OC credit for the nonviolent communication. What's the second book? Do you remember the second
So
book?
that's the one that she had us read.
Created for
Created for
Connection.
Connection.
Yes,
Yes,
Created
yes.
for Connection by Sue Johnson. That book is another game changer. If you are looking to go into business with your spouse, these two books is a must read
Mhm.
for you and your spouse, is a must read. The first one is Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg, I think. Then the second one is Created for Connection. I will link the two books in the podcast description so you can click on it. Even if you are not going into business with your spouse, those two books are good for you to read if you are married, period. They
Mhm.
will help your communication, they will help your connection with your spouse. And I can't say enough about those books, but yeah, I'll give OC credit for the first one, then I'll take credit for the second one. How about that?
That works for me.
uh, so, how do you decide when to prioritize business needs versus personal or family needs without feeling like one is being sacrificed for the other? I know you mentioned a little bit about this when you talked about the number one mistake, but now that you have learned that mistake, how do you prioritize these different needs?
I don't know that there is a rubric. I mean, maybe someone has one out there, but I haven't come across one yet in terms of prioritizing. The thing for me is when needs do come up, we look at a situation, just being able to have conversations, say, okay, here are some critical things right in front of us, and we talk through it, and then we understand what are the implications of those decisions. Because the way that the business ties to the family and kind of bleeds in, the way that the my work ties into the family and bleeds in, the way that your career works ties into the family and bleeds in, is kind of hard to set clear boundaries throughout everything. So what has been helpful for us is just realizing, sort of like, they say when you meditate, the idea is not to try to fight off ideas, it's just to kind of let them come in and pass through. And then you just let them just be a channel by which those things will go through and pass through, but it doesn't dwell. So that approach for me has been the way that it's been, where when it comes to business and how I prioritize it, is just when the need arises, we take a look at, okay, what are the impact that it's going to have on family, finances, or relationship, and then we kind of figure it out at that point. And if you recall back, that was I don't recall the year, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, where after we'd been using our personal finances to support the business, you stated, okay, that going from this time next year, the business needs to stand on its own and support itself without us having to support it with our family finances. So you kind of set that goal, and I agreed with you on that, and then we began to push towards that. So that was why we began to seek for to grow the business and to seek for other sources of funding to be able to drive the business forward. And to your credit, that began to happen. The business began to find sources of financing to support itself and to also be able to generate enough revenue to support itself. So that's been the way that we've kind of figured it out. So as you can tell from my answer, there hasn't been a clear path that we have figured out, at least for me personally, that I've figured out. It's just looking at the circumstance at the time and making decision based on what's at the best interest of each other and the family. And it's always going to be where one pushes the other and then it pushes back and it goes back and forth. There's really no hard, strong lines that we have drawn to be able to manage that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. For me, one of the ways I've been able to prioritize is I ask myself the question when everything comes down to the wire. And it reminds me of my previous episode where I talked about the priority mindset. I ask myself when everything comes down to the wire, when everything is stripped away and we're at the core, what is most important to me? And for me, my answer is family first. So that is what helps me to prioritize to say, okay, this is how much I'm willing to make a sacrifice for the business without it affecting the family. To where I'm like, okay, if I had to choose between the business and the family, family is going to come first. I will prioritize the needs of the family. And so that's why I was able to make set a goal to say, okay, by this time next year, I want us to reduce our contribution from the family to the business so that it doesn't put us in a place of jeopardy. So you can think of what is important to you and your spouse, have that conversation and say, okay, when everything is stripped away, at the core of who we are, what do we prioritize? What is most valuable to us? And based on that, you can use that to start drawing the line that might be blurred, but as you work on it and set those priorities, you're able to put some kind of demarcation between both of them.
So the view that you hold there, and that's something that we've gone back and forth on severally in terms of, okay, the business versus the family. And I tend to see it differently. I've always said that it's not one versus the other. Because in my mind, I don't see it as one versus the other, because that connotes that one is trying to usurp the other, one is trying to beat down the other. I see it as more like you have two siblings, and one comes to report to the dad and say, hey, this person slapped me. And then you have to now decide, what are you going to do as a father, right? Are you going to slap the other kid? Or are you going to make peace between them? Which is what I learned to do, to make peace between the two parties. Now, what that peace looks like might be where you make one person say they are sorry to the other person, and to, in my case, I will give them one strike and say, you have one strike or two strikes. If you get a third strike, here's the consequence. So it's not one child versus the other child, because they're both equally my children. I'm invested in them. So the business obviously is not a child in this case, but it is something that we invested our time, our effort, our resources in. If it's beginning to eat too much into the family, then it becomes a conversation of, okay, this child is consuming too much resources. Are we going to have to muzzle the mouth of this child so it doesn't eat up these other children's future, and be able to manage it? And there will be times where one child may need more help than the other child, and and it's okay sometimes to be able to give one child more attention, and then eventually switch across, as long as it's not consistently one child getting all the attention all the time, because every child is different. Same thing in this scenario. It's a situation where the business at the beginning may need more help, and
Right.
family may struggle, as we did initially, and then eventually the business may get to that point where it can be is old enough to support itself and be able to now be able to support the family. So it's not one, to me, mama, it's not one versus the other. Is okay, who needs more help right now? And how
Who
can we
needs more
support
help?
that person right now? And then future, that person can now support the others.
I like that thought process. Who needs more help right now? So it's not a this versus this, but who needs more help right now? So speaking of needing of help and balancing both, how do you ensure that work-related conversations don't dominate personal time together? And because you talked about having the two children and two of them needing time, how do you decide
It,
which
for,
child gets more time?
it's nuanced. It's very nuanced in the sense that you one person is always going to be more passionate about discussing the business than the other person, and the other person is going to be the one that will call it out and say, hey, you are okay, this is time for us to just focus on each other. So, and in our relationship, I tend to be the one that doesn't draw that boundary very naturally, and she has to remind me that, hey, okay, it's time to back up. Before my position was like, why do you always have to set this boundary? Why do you always have to stop? But then as time went on, I began to learn about her needs to be able to separate it. To then I began to acquiesce to the point where I'm now able to, like the last conversation we had, where she was the one that was talking more about the business. I have to tell her, madam, please, let's put business aside and talk about ourselves. So, and that's part of the growth as a couple, right? Because
Right.
everyone grows at different stages. And you might be the one right now that prioritizes having a conversation about your relationship and the family first, and the other person might be the one that's all about business, business, business. That can switch over time, and you may not even know when that switch does happen. So
Right.
don't feel like you have this halo over your head, or you're the one that always focus on family, always focus on relationship, but this person is all about business. Don't make it about this versus that, but make it about, okay, I need to draw this person to these other things, because most people are live on the extremes. Most entrepreneurs actually live on the extremes, and it's a matter of just accepting that person and working with that person and navigating with that person to bring them to the center, and being patient enough that she's been patient with me to the
Being
point where I can be
patient.
able to have conversations where, if the business blessing, I'm like, madam, let's put that on the side and focus on ourselves. And it took time to get there, so it wouldn't be that way from the beginning. You just have to work at it and be patient with each other.
Be patient. You're going to need a lot of patience
Absolutely. Absolutely.
working with a spouse in business, whether you're just starting your service based business or maybe you've been on the business with your spouse. Patience is something, and I believe that there are levels of patience because there are certain things, especially when especially if you're going to be working with your spouse on that business for a long time, your patience has to keep growing. It has to keep growing for you to keep showing up and doing the things.
Let me chime in with this. People say I set out to build a business, but I heard this message a couple of weeks ago that someone put it this way, that most times in life we think we set out to go build something, but the thing that we think we're building is actually building us.
That's right. That's
Because
right.
I thought we went to build a business, but that business has built our relationship. It has shaped our business. It has brought out things from us that ordinarily we would not have talked about, we would
Right.
not have dealt with. Those things would have just lingered and we wouldn't have attacked them head on. But because of this business bringing out those things in us, it allowed us to have certain conversations and to thrash out those things. So don't think of it as you're going to build business. You're going to discover each other in ways you could have never imagined.
That's
You have to
right.
be patient in that discovery because it's a long, long time of discovery.
Yes, it's a really long time of discovery. And in our case, it's been 19/20 years of discovering, depending on who you ask. So it's 19 for me, 20 for OC, of just discovering, working together as a couple, running a business together, and trying to balance it all. So, OC, this has been an exciting conversation for me. At some point, I'm like, okay, am I not the one interviewing you? I've had so much fun just listening to you answer these questions. I have learned from the things you've said, although we've been in it together, but just hearing you say it uh, as an answer to my questions, it's helping me even appreciate our journey even more. So here's the final question I have for you as we wrap up this episode. As we celebrate 19/20, okay, let's just stick with 19. How about that?
That
Since
works for me.
you're on my podcast, I think we should stick with 19 for today.
Okay.
All right. So, what is one lesson from our 19 years of marriage that has been especially valuable in running our business? I know there are so many lessons, but what is that one lesson that you can leave my audience with as we wrap up this episode as your final thought?
Uh, Interestingly, that we alluded to it in the last question, which is patience.
Mm.
It is for me. For me, I grew up where in an environment where we were taught not. It wasn't indirectly. It wasn't directly, but it wasn't indirectly. You are taught not to be patient by the way we were brought up. You are taxed with moving quickly. You don't stand still doing nothing. If you're seen standing still doing nothing, you are reprimanded. You are smart. You got to be up and moving. So I grew impatient a lot because there was a certain way I grew up doing things, a certain way I saw things being done. And when I'm seeing people do things differently, it irked me deeply. So I spent a good chunk of my life trying to force people to do things my way and to see my way as the right way. Get it done now, now, now. You must move at this pace. You got to get this thing. You got to move like. So I was all about go, 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 go. Standing still to me was like death. It
Wow.
was like somebody was slowly using syringe to suck life out of me. And
Wow.
having to be patient with someone that moves at a different pace, with someone that thinks differently, approaches life differently, I had to pause and find a path within her own path to find a way to live because I needed to fit the two parts together to work. Because it's either I run alone and go off the edge and go off the cliff, or I walk with her. She can hold me together, hold me a little bit, and then I can be able to measure my steps and see clearly, clearer. So being patient through that journey has been incredibly tasking, but it has been deeply rewarding. So for anyone that's looking to get in business with their spouse, it's not like 9 to 5 where you leave them in the morning and go deal with office stuff and then come back home to deal with them for the rest of the evening. You are dealing with them 24/7
That's right.
every day, and you don't have a punch out time. It is full on 24/7. As much as you're awake, you're dealing with that person. So you get to see different dimensions of that person. Unless if you don't want to learn your spouse deeply enough, don't do business with them. But if you want to learn your spouse and have them irk you in ways that you had never imagined, do business with your spouse and you will learn so much about yourself. But you have to be willing, deeply willing to learn and to be patient through the journey, because it's a long, long journey.
Wow, be patient. Thank you so much, OC. Thank you so much. As you were speaking about being patient, it reminded me of my favorite word that I used to say to you. I'm like, don't rush me. Don't rush me. Because I hated being rushed. I like to take
Because
my
I need to
time.
get this done like yesterday.
So I always tell him, don't rush me. I need to think through this. I need to, like you all know, I am very structured. I like systems. I'm thoughtful. So yeah, be patient. You're going to need it. You're going to need tons of patience as you work with your spouse. Thank you so much, OC. Thank you so much for finally coming to my podcast and just sharing your wisdom, sharing your years of experience working with me in business and being married to me. I want to officially, no, well, not officially, but say happy 19th anniversary, or maybe 20th, but hey, 19th for the show.
Whatever you say, that's what it is.
Thank you so much for being on here. It was such a pleasure to have you on today's podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So, OC, how can my people connect with you? How can my audience connect with you to learn more about what you're doing and all of that?
I'm most active on LinkedIn. I know it's weird, most people on other social media platforms, but I live on LinkedIn. So you can look me up by my full name, Osinachi Okomadu, and you will find me on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only Osinachi Okomadu on LinkedIn. So as a high probability, if you search my full name, Osinachi, last name Ukomadu, you would find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome, awesome. He's also on Twitter. If you're on Twitter and you like to follow him, I will drop his handles in the podcast description so that you can click and follow him and learn more about what he's doing in the e-commerce space and in other areas of his life. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. I hope you enjoyed our banter, our conversation, and I will see you here next week. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you learned something new and you were encouraged to take action. If so, will you stop right now and share this episode with someone so they can get the help you just got? I would also love it if you can leave a review for this podcast on Apple Podcast or the podcast app you're using to listen. This is the number one way I know you're getting value from the content on this podcast. Until next time, always remember you have all you need to start that business. So keep listening for more episodes. I'll meet you here next week.